Hello, everyone. Hello. I'll give it a couple seconds to let everyone join in, and we'll get started today. To see everyone. Welcome, welcome. All righty. So, hello. Welcome, everyone. I hope you're doing all fantastic today. Happy Thursday. Happy pre-Friday to your Friday. A few things to mention before we jump in. I'm sure you may have noticed when you first joined into the webinar that you noticed that your mics are muted. If you do have any questions or comments, we do encourage you to utilize the QA chat function during the presentation, where our teams will be able to reply to you mid-presentation. But once the webinar does conclude, we will be moving into a more live Q&A section where we'll allow users to unmute and ask questions to our team in real time. But more on that afterwards. Lastly, this is our last webinar for the year. I know it's very sad, but don't worry. We'll be back in full swing in January once the new year starts. But at this time, I do want to hand it over to Michael to give you guys a brief message. Over to you, Michael.
Everyone, welcome to our SharePoint Concierge clients and any guests that are joining us today. 20 seconds on what we're doing today. SharePoint Concierge is a service we recognized working with clients that 6 months, maybe a year after an implementation, many were unaware of the new features that Microsoft's rolling out. So they're doing that every few weeks. We're learning something every day. And so these 10 webinars a year are to help inform you of features. Much of this is just education, some training, and letting you know about features that simply need to be activated, or maybe providing some training to you to implement them. And I'm excited about this month's webinar. We've got some cool things. You're going to learn how to use Copilot to summarize documents. I talked to so many people on initial calls that have all these SharePoint sites and not really sure what's being used. Leona's going to take you through how to manage, inactive sites and just better maintain your tenant. And then some cool information about retention policies and labels to help meet regulatory and governance needs. So we've got a jam-packed session for you today. I'll let Hayden kind of give you the agenda there, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good. Thank you, Michael. As he said, we do have a jam-packed schedule today. We have a wider range of topics we want to cover, including a few new features. In fact, we're going to start off with some new features taught by Katie. She'll be going over how to prevent all editors from making changes in modern lists, especially the form feature. This is going to really maximize, security and making sure that your content is secure, who has edit rights, without having to change too much. And so following her today, we will have Dylan, who's showing off the new iframe functionality and how to embed them in Microsoft lists themselves. Once he concludes that, he's jumping right into the next teaching as well and going over the new Copilot feature. AI is here, and we are learning about it today. The new Copilot feature will not only help summarize your documents, but help answer questions about them and much more. And he'll cover all that today. Ken will then be teaching us all about retention policies and labels to meet governance at a content level. And then last but certainly not least, Leona will then bring us up to speed with SharePoint site lifecycle management. This is a must-know topic for any organization of any size and focuses more on the governance from a site or sites level. And so you're going to get a lot of good topics no matter where you and your organization are at with these different features. But as you see, we do have a lot of ground to cover. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump ahead into the first topic, how to prevent all editor changes for forms and modern lists, taught by Katie. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Hayden. So yeah, as Hayden said, we're going to talk about how to prevent people with edit rights from being able to access the new form features. You might have seen this in SharePoint lists. In the command bar, there's that new option for the SharePoint forms. So we're going to look at two different ways in order to prevent this. First, we're going to talk about changing the permissions level for that list. Secondly, we're going to look at an option using JSON to hide it. So first, I want to touch on why you might want to hide this list. So right here, I have a form. I've gone ahead and I've actually removed access from anyone except for the owners here. And I did this because I want to show you if you use the standard SharePoint forms right here, you might have, sent this out by copying this link. Now, if someone doesn't have permissions to this form, what would happen if they go there? Here I have a different user. I'm going to go ahead and paste in that link. And so what would happen is that you actually won't have access, but using this new forms option, right, and here, you could send this link to anyone in the, and they'd be able to access it, regardless if they have access to this list or not. So let's go ahead and change the access. So in our site, we could take a look at just the standard permissions here. So we have our members, which is that other user that we're showing with that purple. And so with that edit, you have the ability to manage and the settings and the structure for SharePoint lists and sites. So perhaps you don't want them to do that. One way that you could change that is I'm going to come over to this and we're going to click Manage Access. In our group, so the way that SharePoint permissions works is through inheritance. So from the get-go, your SharePoint list is going to have the same permissions as the site. So you could see, as we saw in that site permissions, we have our members that could edit this list. So we could click on here and change that direct access so that they could only edit the items rather than the list. And we could hit apply. What this does behind the scenes is change the permissions from edit to contribute. So we could actually see that if we come into the advanced settings here, we can see that this list now has unique permissions and that members group now has the permission level of contribute. So now that there is the contribute permission, we no longer see that forms option up at the top. So another way that you could prevent people from using that forms list is by using some simple JSON in for the view. So in the all items, you could click the drop down and go to format that current view. You go to advanced mode down at the bottom, and you'll be able to add in the JSON. This JSON code is going to be available in the presentation, so it will be available for you. But it uses the command bar props, and it's going to hide that manage forms option that's right here. So if we hit save, we could see that forms option went away. So one thing to note is when you're using the JSON, is that the forms option is going to be hidden from everyone for that view. So it's also worth to note that if you do use the JSON, someone that does have edit access can still go in to the formatting and remove that view setting, and it will come back. So there are a few, different ways talking about permissions for, lists without having to get really into the nitty-gritty of applying different permission levels for different people. Just being able to say, hey, for this list, I want to be able to only have our members be able to contribute and not change the structure or the settings for this list. So with that, I am going to pass it back over to you, Hayden.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Katie. I think we can all agree that content is super important to the success of any SharePoint, but equally, if not more important, is the security and permissions that surround that content to make sure the right audiences can view or change that content. So this is just another great way to make sure that the security for your list are running as necessary. Right now, we're just going to go ahead and jump into the next two segments that are taught by Dylan. He'll be teaching us how to embed iframes into lists, as well as some new Copilot features. Over to you, Dylan.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So in today's presentation for the first topic, as Hayden was mentioning, I'll show about this feature that's in the list that allows you to embed iframes directly into the list. And then just one thing in mind there, this is basically the newer version of the list supports this. And I'll show that and I'll explain that a little bit more, but this could be pretty useful, at least for what my use case that I'll show today is where you could basically have like dynamic filtered content appear in your like little pop-ups on your list, maybe show related items. You could even do other things like, links to videos that pop up on an item and things like that. You could put it on a page, or when people go to the list, you could have that. So anyways, I'll show that example. I'll get into it more. But before I do that, I'll go ahead and explain a couple terms here. So just the MS list, so just to explain, basically there's been this upgrade that's happening, where there's just the SharePoint modern list and there's the Microsoft list app. They're kind of the same thing, but they've kind of look a little different. And Microsoft's been in this process of sort of upgrading the modern SharePoint list to this new version, which some of you may have noticed. Maybe even some of your advanced formatted views changed a little bit. The web parts changed. The list looks different. And what's going on is, they're doing this kind of newer version of the modern, and it's sort of blending that look and feel between the list app, and also the SharePoint modern views of the list, and also adding in different functionality there. And then, so the iframe, just to explain, it's like, if you embed a YouTube video on a web page or something like that, it's basically where you're creating like this little window to some other source, some other document, or whatever it is. That's what we're talking about with the iframe. And then one other term here, the advanced formatting or JSON formatting, which this uses in this context is really the schemas that Microsoft provides, where they kind of roll out features to let you customize or extend the functionality of your lists and libraries. But in this case, this is specifically a list feature, and I'll show it in the column formatting schema, basically. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and pull on the screen my example. I'll walk through some of the basics too, how you can set it up. So let me bring it on over. I already have this little formatting window open. I'll close it for now just to show. So the functionality here, I've got a list that has basically where you can sign up for events, and I've just got like a normal list view right now that I'm showing on the screen. And on my attendees column, I've just got a couple of buttons that you can click. And so this opens an iframe, and in this one, it's actually dynamic, so that if I want to view the attendees of any of these events, it's actually showing a filtered list view of the attendees for that item. So as I click through these, if there's no attendees, there's nothing there. And then for these other ones, there's whoever signed up for that given one. So you can see that's actually filtered by the related ID. So that could be potentially useful, kind of nice, if you don't want someone to, maybe they have to click a link to open to a new page, you could have something that's available right, on the list. And just to show some other examples here, I have like the view calendar. So, potentially you could have like a calendar that pops up, without them having to switch to another view. And then the other one here, which can be an interesting use case, would be to actually have the sign up. So this sign up, it opens a little Power Apps form that I have on here, and basically it's actually passing that the event over to the form dynamically. And so I'm actually doing that in the JSON, and then there's some stuff on the Power Apps form as well. But basically, you can see as I click through, it's actually tagging the event that you're signing up for, without having to be redirected to another screen where you could sort of quickly, sign up for that event. So kind of interesting, how that works. So, just a little sign up there, and right from the little pop-up window. Of course, you could use this in other ways too. In my example, yeah, I'm passing values from that list item for, to show kind of other views. But there's other ways you could use it as well. Like, yeah, you could have videos, things like that, that could play. It doesn't have to just be in the list as well. If you're already been fully upgraded in both the web parts and in the list, then this will also work on pages as well. And just to show real quick, I think I have a page pulled up. Maybe I backed out. Anyways, I was going to just show the same. Yeah, here we go. So the same thing, it can work on a SharePoint page as well if this web part is also on the new version of the list, so that those pop-ups still work even if it's on a page, allowing them to do the same thing. So just to show that it is possible as well. And then if I just come over, I'll just show a little bit about how you can set it up. So I've actually done it on the column itself. So I'm going to go to the column settings and format this column, and I'll just show a little bit about this real quick. Don't have to go too in depth, but it is, so I've already gone to that sort of advanced formatting, where, by default it's kind of showing that the basic things you can do. You can switch to the advanced mode, and you can see I have the column formatting scheme on there because I'm formatting the column. And then the main thing here is this is the action here. It's the embed. So if I was to remove this under the action here and hit the control space, it shows you the different actions that you can do. And, like set values, the share, open context window. And this is the newer one is the embed. And when you use that action embed under the action input, it just lets you choose the source and then a height and width for the window. So if you want to change that height and width to a different size, like for instance, in the sign up button, I've got it smaller versus, for the attendees, it's a bigger window. So you can, for your different buttons, you could potentially have different height and widths. And in this case, I've got 3 buttons set up. And that's just how I'm using it, is in a button. You could also probably do a hover effect as well. But that's just how I'm using it, is where I'm setting the button to be the embed action and then show whatever URL. And so in my case, I've made it dynamic by passing an ID. But this would be any link that you would want, whether it's a field that's already in the list or it's something that you hard code or whatever it is. You could put that source here for whatever your iframe should be. So yeah, potentially some different things you could do there. And then even just to show, I've got this one, which it's basically like a little hover, and then it also can show in my little hover card. So I could have different buttons in the hover card, and then you click the different buttons if you had a bunch of different things you wanted to show. But anyways, yeah, so that's, you can see here, it's opening a SharePoint form. So yeah, potentially a lot of things you could do there. So just kind of an interesting feature if you're already on the new list, and something you could play around with. Yeah, so it's whatever you could think up there. It could be tried out, as long as it's a source that you're allowed to connect to on your site. There is some settings in the back end if it's a website that's not already added that you can pull from, but that can be updated. But anyways, yeah, so with that in mind, I think that'll cover the first topic. And yeah, if you want to try it out, it's that action that's set to embed. There is a little document they have online as well that kind of goes through the different available attributes that you can use. But yeah, for now, it's kind of just a basic run through to show that feature there. So with that in mind, I'll go to our next topic. So let me change my slide here. Yeah, so this next one here. Yeah, so in this presentation here, I'll go over just some of the newer things they've been rolling out with the Microsoft 365 Copilot for Business. And that's related to the OneDrive, and now also even within SharePoint, of basically just from within the OneDrive app, or even from now within SharePoint libraries as well. You can create FAQs, summarize documents, ask questions about the documents, and just do it right there by selecting the document. And I'll walk through that as well. You'll see the little Copilot icon if you have the Copilot license, and be able to ask questions about it, or maybe it'll even, if it can't find it in the document, it could just pull from its knowledge base or online or whatever you want to help get the answer as well. But this could be interesting where, if you have policies, things like that, maybe how-to instructional documents, maybe meeting notes, whatever they may be, where you could just select the document and have it either generate FAQs for you, summarize it. Maybe you just want to ask your own question about it, whatever it may be. So it's kind of a nice feature that they've added onto that, and they've been building upon it actually in the past few months. So yeah, pretty interesting, and I'll get into that. And just to explain as well, this feature here is part of the particular Microsoft 365 Copilot for Business. It's like a per user license. I think right now it costs $30 per month. So if you already have that, then this is something you'll be able to go ahead and try out if you haven't seen it yet. And I'll go ahead and pull on the screen and walk through some examples of how you can use it. So let me pull this onto the screen real quick. So I've actually just, in my starting point here, I've actually got OneDrive already open. So the OneDrive here, it's already got, and this is just in the browser version here. So it's got, anything that it can pull from in the environment here. So I've got my different sites and teams and files, things that were shared with me, whether it be in Microsoft Teams or in Outlook, or it'd be on a SharePoint site, or, files that are synced to a OneDrive on my computer. So, it can all in one place. You can just, look through your stuff here in the OneDrive app. And so I've already got this is actually a SharePoint library I've already got open just for the first example here, just to show. And so for instance, there's like a kind of a basic policy document here. And so something you can do, you can see, have that little Copilot action button here that I can click. And so basically any file that it can sort of rip the text out of, you'll see that little icon next to it that it can, that you can click, and it'll have a couple actions that you can do. So for instance, if I close this just to start from scratch here, I see that little icon. So I can click it, and let's say, maybe it's a policy document on your site. You want to create some FAQs out of it, or get some boilerplates for FAQs, maybe get some ideas. I could say create an FAQ, and it'll just generate based off that document some potential, question and answers based off that. So, it's kind of interesting to get that basic boilerplate there to start out, and be able to, have some something to start out with, basically. And maybe I need to refresh. I already clicked it a couple of times here before this call. I'll just do it one more time. And I've got a couple documents I could try it out on. And the other thing that I can do as well is summarize and let you ask additional questions. So in this first one here, it did some FAQs. So I've got 5 different FAQs that it generated with the questions and the answers. And so something you could try out and see if you like it or not. You could ask it to generate again. You could copy it. I could try asking an additional question about it. If I wanted to see, and it'll pull it up in a little chat pane on the side here, and it'll even give you some example questions that you might want to ask. So it's kind of interesting. So I could even try one of these out. And so I'm just asking my own questions now versus the ones it generated. And if it's not directly in the document, it may just give you some general information. But I could also try just to show real quick. Do like the summarize, so just to get the overview of the document, it'll do a little summary. If it can't do that for the document, you can try some of the other things like just asking the question directly, but I'll go ahead and do a summarize on this one. This is my little cheat sheet. And so basically, oh yeah, I may have the files locked. I need to check that. But yeah, so I actually have a content approval turned on this one. So anyways, but I'll go ahead and open the ask a question. I'll just show, I'll do a new chat. So I'm coming up to my little window, do a new chat, and I'll just ask it a question, for instance. So something I maybe not too familiar with, I might ask it to strip permissions, and how to do that. And so it might pull from that document and give me an idea of, what I'm looking to do. So that's a common document I have is a cheat sheet. And I want to ask it, what's the request for, removing permissions on a document, on an item, and it gives me the little answer there with some breakdowns of that, and potentially expound upon it. So kind of interesting. And for any of those, you can try that. Summarize, create FAQ, ask a question, and then in the similar fashion, it's one of the newer things they've done as well. If you have the Copilot, you'll see that it's actually available in SharePoint as well. So this works on SharePoint pages as well as documents. I'm focusing on the document side right now. So I'm in a document library, and I can actually open this little Copilot icon. And what I can do is select the document and do the same thing here. So it's those same options: to summarize, create FAQ, and it's got a few other things it could do as well. You could just ask questions. So I could try to get it to generate FAQ there, and for the selected file. So, it's also there in SharePoint as well. So they're kind of expanding upon where it can be done, not just in that OneDrive app. They've got it in the SharePoint side as well. So that's pretty interesting, that it could, that they've also expanded it to the SharePoint side. And so they're kind of really building it out. So no matter where you are in your environment, you could potentially use that Copilot to help you, maybe understand your documents better. Something else you could do as well. So I'm doing it for a selected document by selecting it and using that. You probably could also just open your chat window in Teams if you already have the license for it, and help you find the document as well. Or if it's maybe you don't have it saved somewhere, maybe it was just shared with you in a Teams channel or something, it can search through that, or attachments in your Outlook, things like that. So it's able to search across that environment to help you find the document and ask questions, summarize it, and things of that nature. So they are building upon this, and it is nice as well. And maybe in the future webinars, to get into some of the other stuff they can do with the SharePoint pages and stuff like that, because they are expanding, where that Copilot is available. So with that in mind, I will go ahead and hand this back over, and that will conclude my second topic.
Thank you so much, Dylan. Yeah, as Dylan was saying, Microsoft, it's amazing what Microsoft is doing with AI and Copilot, and how they're really pushing this throughout all of their products. We're obviously more excited about the SharePoint stuff, but all of it's really exciting. But because they're constantly updating it, we are so determined to stay on the cutting edge of this AI. This is the next era of technology, and we want to keep you guys updated too. So we'll definitely have more teachings and trainings on that. Also, don't forget about the iframes, the first teaching he did. So many clients that we talk to usually have a common issue of having so much content on that they want to share or display on a page, but they don't want to create that like super elongated page for the end user to have to go through. And so the iframes is a great way to store content or shelf content for easy use without having it always having to be displayed. So two really cool features that may help you out in your organization. With that said, it's time for the retention policies and labels training by Ken to help with all your governance needs at a content level. Over to you, Ken.
Great, thanks, Hayden. Some of the things we speak to our clients about quite often is the idea of how do I make sure that I'm compliant with the regulations that my industry has. So financial services, healthcare, manufacturing in some cases, if you're a government contractor, for example, one of the things that you're almost always required to do is to keep records. Business records are legally distinct, and they often have retention periods 5 years, 7 years, 12 years in some cases. There are even extremely draconian laws in the financial services industry that requires you to keep items around forever. In fact, you can't touch them once you've designated them as a business record. SharePoint can help you with that. SharePoint has a phenomenal compliance engine. It's built into the Purview Center. The compliance engine has been slowly getting better over time. And I would say in the last year or so, Microsoft has made huge leaps in making it very business friendly. There are 2 business roles that can be applied, and those roles allow a business person who may not be technically savvy to work with something as complex as the compliance engine. So compliance allows you to build out a label structure. So you can build out the labels for retain for 5 years, retain for 12 years, retain forever. And then you can apply those labels to targeted areas or across your tenant using the policies. Policies run everywhere in the Microsoft 365 universe. That's what the tool that Microsoft uses to enforce things in various areas. In almost every one of the administrative consoles, you'll see some form of policy, and the compliance retention area is no different than that. So the steps are create your labels and then apply them. The nice thing about the compliance area, specifically retention, is that you can actually create a label structure and apply them to your sites in a way that's effectively not going to do anything to those documents. It's going to label them, which means you can now report on content that's been labeled, but it won't actually kick in any kind of compliance activity at any given point in time. It won't do anything to the document in terms of being able to edit or change the properties or delete the document. And the reason Microsoft provides that feature is that they're looking to give you a soft way to begin to use this kind of tool that won't really have an impact other than cosmetic, because now you're just labeling content. But then you can layer on top of that the idea of, I do want to actually have the full compliance. I want to use these tools to help me pass audit. And that's when the concept of business record comes into play. So Microsoft has provided a table. It gives you a really good guidance on how to look at when I create a label, what should I do when I'm structuring it. You can create it as just a retention label. You'll see here that you can edit the content of a document that's labeled with something that's just a retention label. You can edit the properties, you can rename, you can delete, you can copy, you can move within and across containers, containers being libraries and sites. You can open and read, you can change that label, and you can remove that label. So this approach would give your staff the ability to begin to understand your intent with labeling without impacting their day-to-day management. But as soon as you decide that you want to begin to use this as an audit compliance tool and that this becomes one of your control mechanisms, then we move into the next 2 columns and we start to look at, if this is declared a business record, what can the person do with that document? So you'll notice that I have record locked and record unlocked as 2 different categories. And there's slightly different permissions allowed with the document depending on which of these 2 you choose. So if I have a locked record, I can no longer edit the content of that record. That is critical for some compliance measures. There are regulations in place that say once an activity has occurred and you now have a business record, you can't touch that record. A signed contract is an example of that in some areas, because that contract is now going to be something that's going to be enforced by the rule of law, and you don't want anyone going in and potentially changing the body of that contract. So you can't edit the content. But you can edit the properties, including renaming the document. And that's because if you had a metadata field that would be something like assigned to or contact, they want to give you the ability to update that over time. But you won't be able to delete the content. And you won't be able to do a few other things with the content from a deletion perspective. And that's because the content, once locked, similar to the edit content, it lives in a special space then from a compliance perspective. The delete function is very interesting because deleting the content is sometimes allowed when you're using this feature, but what happens is when you delete the content, it actually moves into a hold area. So the document leaves its living space. It looks like it has actually been deleted, but it hasn't. There's a perpetual library that's kept, and in that space, the document now lives with extra metadata telling basically when was the document removed from its living space, who removed it, and a few other metadata tags. You'll see you do have the ability to copy that document. That would give you the ability, if you needed to version it, you could copy it out and then begin to work on the next version of the document. And you can move the document around. The move across containers, it will allow you to move it provided you haven't ever touched the document, basically, if it's in its original state. You can open and read the document. And then we get to the last two, changing and removing the label. Those two are absolutely critical to bear in mind, because if you have something where staff are applying the label and they're not a site collection administrator level or above, they won't actually be able to change that label. So you will want a protocol in place if you deploy locked records that allow them to put a help desk ticket in to say, I have misapplied a label, please go in and relabel this content for me. You'll notice that on the unlocked side, we have a lot more blocks. We can't move across containers. We can't change the label. We can't remove the label. So in that case, you would have to copy the document out, and then you'd have to, essentially move that document into its protected space. And then the system level administrators are the ones who can then go in and change the label if they need to. There's a last category here, which is this very heavy locking. You'll notice almost everything is blocked. There's a lot more blocked on this one. This is not available by default. This is for compliance with a very specific financial regulation, and in order to enable it, you actually have to run a PowerShell script, and then the label option becomes available in the compliance console. By default, you'll only have access to these three. So when you're creating your label, it will then ask you, do you want to create a label only? Do you want to create as a record? If you do want to create as a record, do you want to create as locked or as unlocked? And once again, once you have the labels created, then you run your policies to deploy that label or a batch of labels together. Most people will create a batch of labels. They'll go through, they'll do their 5-year retention, their 7-year retention, their 12-year, and their retained forever labels. And then they'll deploy a single policy to push those out, usually tenant wide. You can target via the policies where you want to push those out. They do allow both static and dynamic targeting. The dynamic targeting means that were things to change within your environment that match the dynamic query that you give the engine at the time that you create the policy, it will actually adjust where that policy is pushing these labels, which means you don't have to keep an eye on adding new teams, new sites, and so on. Things will come online even as you work with new objects because there's a query that's driving where things are going. Or you can use a static policy that's more generic, such as, I want to push this out tenant-wide. And there's a sample policy that allows you to do that, allows you to choose the option to just say, apply this everywhere. At that case, when you apply it, what you'll begin to see is the labels will light up, particularly in the SharePoint environment. So I have a demonstration of that here, so we'll take a look. So here I have a document library where I have both sensitivity labels and retention labels deployed, and I can go to one of my documents like a sample contract, and I can see, oh, it's been signed. And so I can look at the properties for this. And in the properties, I will have, unfortunately, it's only called label. It says apply label. I really wish it said retention label, but it does just say the word label. We use the label generically for a lot of concepts. Here you'll see apply label. And then when you choose, you can then pick what is the label that I want to apply. And so in my case, I have keep forever deployed. And so I can choose that. When I choose that label, you will see that I have a retention label column. It tells me what label has been applied. I have when was this applied. It gives the time and date stamp. And then I have who applied that label. This is just a label. We don't have any of the retention rules running against it, so I could remove it. But again, if this were declared a record and it was locked, then at that point in time, this would be fit for compliance in terms of an audit function, because the auditors would come in, ask what system controls were in place. If they understood the SharePoint environment, you could just tell them you have retention labels enabled. If not, you can educate them as to that. Microsoft has a phenomenal web page. It's linked in the PowerPoint that we share with you. That web page describes the level of compliance that you're getting with these tools. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Hayden.
Thank you so much, Ken. Like I said at the beginning of this webinar, this feature and functionality is so needed no matter the size of your organization. And having it in place properly, keyword is properly, not only helps you keep you safe and your content safe, but it also over time reduces maintenance needs, which from anyone who's taking care of the governance of the organization, anything you can take off their plate, I'm sure they're happy to hand it over. But with that said, let's go ahead and dive a little bit into the SharePoint site lifecycle management with Leona, which complements this last topic very well. Over to you, Leona. You there, Leona?
My apologies. It seems like I was muted.
No problem.
So today we'll be covering the SharePoint Lifecycle Management tool, which is inside the SharePoint admin portal. Currently, these will allow you to have two different types of policies. One will be the site ownership policies, which kind of allows you to say, what is the minimum number of either admins or owners that need to exist for compliance for the site collection? And then also notifications will be sent out to those owners if they do not meet that compliance. And after a certain duration of time, you can also act on that non-compliance there. And then there's also the inactive site policy. This will also build a report for you that will kind of notify site owners or admins based off of inactivity on a site. And we'll go in a little bit more depth on that here in just a moment. One initial thing to be aware of, this does require a SharePoint Advanced Management Plan 1 license to run. So just be aware that, hey, if you do not have that license right this second, you will not see these controls in your admin portal. So let's go ahead and pull up our admin portal in SharePoint Online. And so inside of your admin portal, underneath policies, there will be a section called Lifecycle Management here. You click on that. And then we have our two different types of policies that I just referenced. So first, we're going to start off with the ownership policies, because I think that's a little bit more broad strokes that you might want to use. So we'll go ahead and click Open. And this will show you all the current policies that you have in place or existing. We'll talk about simulation versus active here in a minute as well. But we'll kind of walk through the steps of creating a new policy. So you click New Policy. This gives you a quick breakdown of kind of what this policy will be able to do. So again, find sites that do not meet the configured minimum number of owners or admins for a site. What should happen after the duration of time? And then also, should it be kind of locked down or nothing of consequence will happen? So we can hit next. We start off here with the scope of your policy. This allows you to determine if there are certain types of site collections that you wish to apply this to. For the most part, the ones that you'll mostly see will be the ones from communication site downwards. Classic sites is if you got into SharePoint Online really early in the game, you might have some SharePoint Classic sites laying around. But if you have got into SharePoint probably anytime after 2016 and onwards, you're going to be having more of the new modern sites. So that might not be a factor for you. Communication sites, group sites without teams, team sites without groups, and then teams connected sites. So those are going to be sites that were made through teams. So let's just say we want to pull up every single site. We don't really care. If you do have sensitivity labels applied on the site, you can either filter those out to say, hey, I want to exclude these if I so want to. Filter by site creation source, so the methodology in which these were deployed. So maybe if you say, hey, if it was made through PowerShell, we wish to include these or exclude these type of ideas. Also, if you wish to include sites that do have retention policies or retention holds, like Ken was covering a minute ago, if you wish to include those sites or exclude those sites. Lastly, would be also if there are specific URLs that you wish to remove. So if you know, hey, I know that these sites need to stay around for whatever reason. We don't need to show them here. You can put in up to 100 lines in this area here to exclude that from your report. But let's just say we want all sites as of this moment. We hit the next button, we get taken to the configuration page. So this allows us to determine which is responsible for each site. Is it the owner? So those would be the members of the owner's group on the site, and or the site admins, which would be your site collection administrators. So again, if you say, hey, realistically, we're going to ignore site admins because that might be IT and they're not really managing the site. So maybe we want to just say site owners. And then as of right now, Microsoft only has two options for you, either one or two. So again, if you say, hey, as long as there's one owner in there, we're happy, or up to two type of idea. Next, there's going to be who should be notified if by chance a site does roll up into this criteria. Is it by default, it will automatically check whatever you have checked up here. So we can see this one is currently grayed out because we're going to notify the owners that there's not enough. We can also notify the admins, previous site owners. Now, this is a limited duration of time. This is only 30 days from them being removed. So again, this may or may not work for you, depending on your turnover rate and how often you're managing these sites. And lastly, will be active site members. This is going to just kind of pull in the user who's most active on that site. So then if you say, hey, you know what, there's really one person who really uses this site, the owner might just be the owner, but we really care about their opinion. And you can also determine how many site members should be notified. Lastly would be the action that takes place once these sites do roll up, and also inaction happens within 3 months. So let's say you have 25 sites. We put in a couple owners on those sites. Those sites are excluded from the next run of this report. If by chance 3 months goes by and there's inaction from those sites, what should happen? So you can either say, hey, we want to turn the site into a read-only mode, or nothing happens. And this is just more built-in reports for our own audit purposes. So once you do that, you can click next. Lastly will be a page in which you give it a name, you give it a description, and the very bottom has a policy mode type. Simulation will allow you just to run it and get a report from this. The actions will not take place, so it only just allows you to get an Excel printout of all the sites that are inactive or through the doesn't meet the compliance of the number of owners. Or if you're ready to kind of go live with this, this will again start to take action upon those sites, sending notifications and eventually either turning them into read-only or archiving them for the next type of policy. So let's say we are fully satisfied with that. We go ahead and hit the finish button. We get taken back to here, and in essence, we'll have our policies here. Again, simulation means, again, this is going to run when I tell it to run. It's not going to send out notifications to anybody. This just allows me to download our detailed report so I can kind of do an audit there. If you ever, again, wish to run another report or to activate a policy, so let's say you ran it, you say, hey, actually, this is exactly what I expected to get here. You can go ahead and activate a simulation and turn it into an actual live report from that point onwards. Let me go ahead and quickly pull up some of our report documents. Now, these documents are going to look very much the same. Pretty much all the data in both types of reports from both policies will almost be identical. So we get our names of the site, the URL of the site, template of the site, if there is a sensitivity label applied to it, retention policy applied to it, the number of minimum owners that are configured, the number of site owners are on that site, the number of site admins. It will also give you the name or the email addresses and the names of those users. And then you can also see the last activity, this date it was created, and also the size. So you can kind of get a quick printout. You can go manually address these users or manually purge these sites if you so desire. And then we'll go ahead and jump into the next one, which will be the inactive site policies. So this is going to be more for sites to say, hey, there is nothing been going on. So again, one thing that we see quite often with organizations is that Microsoft Teams is a very powerful tool. People start to use it. They start to make a bunch of team sites without being aware that they're making site collections on the back end. And now you have 50 or 100 or 1,000 teams that really no one is using or are neglected. And realistically, it's kind of a pain to kind of go do an audit to go, are these actually being used or are they just falling to the wayside? So this will allow you to kind of do quick runs on that and then allow you to take action upon that as well. So next, we'll hit next. So this is the duration of time. How long do we wish to consider something to be inactive? This also includes the other apps. So again, if by chance you do have a Microsoft Teams site collection, if the Microsoft Teams chat's still being used, or Viva Engage or Exchange, if any of those apps are still being used, they'll be excluded from it, because in essence, they're still being functionally engaged with by the user base as of this moment. The site collection might not be touched, but hey, they're still getting value out of the product on the back end. So just be aware of that. As of right now, Microsoft has a very limited pool of range in which you can pull from. So either 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or 6 months. Just like we saw in the last one, we can choose what type of site template do we wish to use. If there's any sort of method of creation, policies, and retention or sensitivity labels, or exclusion of any specific sites. So as of right now, we'll just say all of them. Who should be notified of the email when a site has been flagged as inactive? The owners or the admins, or both? And then also, what action should take place if it's not been certified by the owners and administration after 3 notifications, which takes about 3 months to run. The enforcement actions will not be edited after the policy creation. So in essence, you're kind of full committing to this. You cannot change this action down here. If you say take an enforcement, you would have to delete this policy and make a new policy if you ever wish to make a modification here. But let's say again, down here, we do have 2 options available to us. One of them is currently deactivated because as of right now, we do not have Microsoft Archive configured on our tenant right this moment. But you could automatically archive a site if by chance inaction doesn't take place or nobody takes ownership of that site, just say keep it around. You can automatically archive it if you do have Microsoft Archive turned on, or you can turn it into a read-only access. Or again, like what we saw previously, we do nothing, and this is just more of a notification to say, hey, we want you guys to be nudged some that you have some content that exists out there. Just real quick, let me go ahead and pull up the email. So what will happen is whenever these reports do run, the owners or the admins will receive an email just like this here, where they can either certify the site, which would then flag it to say, hey, this does need to stay around longer, which means it excludes it from the next run of the report. Or it also has steps on how to delete the site. So then the owner can go in and purge the site themselves. So let's say everything looks fantastic. We hit the next button. Again, this exact same thing that we saw last time. We give it a name. We get turn either in simulation or into an active. And then we hit finish. And then we would have our policies here. Again, Microsoft will tell you that this may take some days to run. So depending on how large your organization is and how much content you have, it may take some time for these reports to run and or to start sending out those notifications so that the users be aware that their sites are either not in compliance with the number of owners or admins, or if their sites have been inactive for too long and what should they do about it type of idea. So that concludes my section today on the 2 different types of policies that are available to us via the site lifecycle management, and I'll pass it back on to you, Hayden.
Thank you so much, Leona. As you can see, there are quite a few variables when making different policies and governance decisions, getting it set up, whether that's discussing retention policies and labels like Ken was covering, or even the teaching that Leona just showed and just shared with us. You may have some hesitancy or concerns of how to get it set up, getting it set up properly and making sure it's functioning well. Anyone who's worked in governance before knows that if it's not set up well, it actually causes a lot more issues than if it was set up a different way. So if you are feeling any of that hesitancy or concern, please feel free to reach out to us. We can either do some training or some working sessions or figure out what your needs are to make sure you and your organization are taken care of. But with that said, that does conclude today's learning portion of today's webinar. I hope that you've been able to learn some new interesting functionality and that you and your teams can explore. Please be on the lookout in your email for the next webinar. Of course, that will be in January. We are taking a small break for the holidays, but we do look forward to learning with you again next year. Before we segue into the Q&A section, of this webinar, I do want to remind everyone that all of the webinar notes, slides, recordings, pretty much all the content, even the behind the scenes stuff like code snippets and things like that, will be on our learning portal for easy access to everything that was discussed for our SharePoint support clients. If for some reason you don't have access or you'd like to gain access for this learning portal, please reach out to us after the webinar and we'll make sure you're taken care of. Our learning portal is the place where you and your team will be able to get all materials, not from just today's webinar, but any future webinar and recordings as well. So with that said, we'll go ahead and segue into the open live Q&A forum. If you don't plan on staying around for the live Q&A, it was great to have you today. Thank you so much for learning with us. On screen, we are showing some instructions on how to raise your hand to ask questions. One of our presenters will unmute your mic and questions will be taken in order of hand raised. Give a couple more minutes just to make sure people are taken care of. We had some good questions in chat today. We love to see that. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much again for joining today. We'll go ahead and close it out, and we will see you guys in a couple months. Thank you.